The once pristine emerald plains of Aronis 7 now bore the scars of orbital bombardments and endless ground skirmishes. Smoke curled into the atmosphere, mingling with the faint glimmers of distant stars. The air was thick with the acrid tang of burning alloys and the stench of alien blood. Sergeant Andra Voss crouched behind a jagged rock formation, her pulse rifle humming softly against her palm. Her enhanced visor flickered as it scanned the desolate terrain for movement. The world around her was chaos, but her mind was razor-focused. She wasn't alone. 13 other members of Echo Squad were scattered around her, their positions marked on her HUD. Enemy movement, northeast. 10 meters, came a hushed voice over the comm. It was Jax, their sniper, perched high in the skeletal remains of a destroyed alien hover tank. Andra didn't respond. She gestured with 2 fingers, signaling her team to hold position. Her heart thrummed, not with fear, but with the predatory thrill that came before a kill. Humanity had perfected the art of war, and Echo Squad was a masterpiece of its craft. A faint, guttural sound echoed across the battlefield. It wasn't a human sound, it was deeper, resonant, like 2 tectonic plates grinding against each other. The sound belonged to the Krathen, an 8-foot-tall apex predator with talons that could carve through titanium. The Krathen were renowned as one of the galaxy's most fearsome warrior species. But they'd made one fatal mistake, underestimating humanity. Andra's visor detected the faint shimmer of cloaking tech as the Krathen advanced. She allowed herself a grim smile. They thought they were the hunters. They were wrong. Jax, she whispered. Already on it, he replied. A single, muffled shot rang out, and the air shimmered as the Krathen's cloaking field failed. The alien staggered, its chest cavity blooming with a spray of luminescent green blood. It let out a deafening roar, shaking the very ground beneath Andra's feet. That was the signal. Engage! Andra barked. Her squad erupted from their positions with precision honed by countless battles. Grenades arced through the air, detonating in brilliant flashes that lit up the battlefield like a macabre fireworks display. Pulse rifles spat streams of plasma, carving through Krathen armor as if it were paper. The Krathen retaliated, their heavy weapons roaring to life. Their beams of searing energy melted rock and vaporized any organic matter they touched. One blast narrowly missed Andra, leaving a smoldering crater inches from her boots. Flank left, she commanded, weaving through the carnage with inhuman agility. Her combat suit enhanced every movement, allowing her to close the gap between her and the nearest Krathen in seconds. The alien swung at her with a blade-like appendage, but she ducked under the strike and rammed her combat knife, a serrated piece of reinforced alloy, into the creature's exposed underarm. It shrieked, and Andra twisted the blade before yanking it free. She didn't stop to savor the kill. There was no time. "Captain, reinforcements incoming," one of her squad members shouted. Andra's visor lit up with new enemy signatures. Dozens of Krathen warriors emerged from the smoke, their armor glinting ominously in the firelight. They moved in perfect formation, an unstoppable tide of destruction. "We're outnumbered," Jax hissed over the comm. "Good," Andra replied, her voice cold and steady. "More targets." The Krathen charged, and the battlefield erupted into chaos once more. Echo Squad fought with a ferocity that defied reason, their every move calculated to maximize damage and minimize exposure. They were brutal, efficient, and unrelenting. But the Krathen were no ordinary foes. One of the aliens grabbed a squad member, Diaz, by the torso and hurled him into a boulder with bone-shattering force. Andra winced but didn't falter. "Diaz is down," another voice called. "Keep fighting," Andra roared. She launched herself at a Krathen, using her suit's augmented strength to tackle it to the ground. They grappled, the alien's talons raking against her armor. She managed to pin it, pressing her rifle under its jaw before pulling the trigger. The creature's head snapped back as green ichor sprayed across her visor. As she stood, wiping the gore from her helmet, a shadow loomed over her. She turned just in time to see a massive Krathen warrior, easily twice the size of the others, bearing down on her. Its weapon, a crackling energy axe, swung in a deadly arc. Andra barely had time to dodge, the blade missing her by millimeters. She retaliated with a barrage of plasma rounds, but they barely scorched its armor. "This one's mine," she growled. The Kraithen lunged again, its movements impossibly fast for its size. Andra ducked and weaved, looking for an opening. Her squad couldn't help her, they were locked in their own life-or-death battles. She had to end this quickly. The alien swung again, but this time Andra didn't dodge. She surged forward, sliding under its guard and driving her knife into the exposed joint of its leg. The Kraithen roared, staggering as she twisted the blade. Before it could recover, she leapt onto its back, wrapping her arm around its neck. With her other hand, she planted a grenade against its armor. "Say goodnight," she snarled, kicking off and rolling away just as the grenade detonated. The Kraithen toppled, its massive frame crumpling as flames consumed it. Andra stood, panting, surveying the battlefield. The remaining Kraithen were retreating, their numbers decimated. "Echo Squad, report," she said. One by one, her team checked in. They were battered, blooded, but alive, except for Diaz. Andra clenched her fists. There wasn't time to mourn. As the dust settled, a strange silence fell over the battlefield. But it wasn't a peaceful silence, it was the kind that made her skin crawl. "Jax, anything on the scanner?" "Negative," he replied, his voice tense. "But something feels off." Andra opened her mouth to respond, but then she felt it, a deep, bone-chilling vibration in the ground. The Kraithen had called for reinforcements. The horizon lit up as massive dropships descended, their engines roaring like thunder. Hundreds of Kraithen poured out, their war cries shaking the air. "Fall back!" Andra shouted. But as they retreated, she realized something else was happening. The Kraithen weren't just advancing, they were clearing a path. And then she saw it. Emerging from the largest dropship was a figure unlike any Kraithen she'd ever seen. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, its armor black as obsidian and etched with crimson runes that pulsed with an eerie light. In its hands was a weapon that radiated raw, destructive energy. Andra's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a warrior. This was a warlord. The Kraithen had brought their champion. "Echo Squad," Andra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not done yet." The warlord raised its weapon, and the battlefield erupted anew. The air cracked with the force of the warlord's weapon. A beam of searing energy erupted from the massive device, carving through the battlefield with a ferocity that defied comprehension. Rocks vaporized, craters formed in seconds, and Echo Squad barely avoided annihilation. Andra hit the dirt, rolling behind a boulder just as the beam scorched the ground where she'd stood. Heat rippled in waves, distorting her visor display. She grimaced and activated her comm. "Status report. I'm pinned down," Jax shouted. His voice was ragged, the sound of pulse fire crackling in the background. "Me too," called Ortega, her tone strained. "These reinforcements are swarming us. They're cutting off escape routes." Andra's mind raced. The Kraithen warlord wasn't just a brute, it was a tactician. Every movement of its troops was precise, calculated to box them in. She could feel the pressure building, the noose tightening. "All right," she snapped. "New plan. Jax, take high ground and find me a weak spot on that warlord. Everyone else, defensive positions. We hold the line until we figure out how to take this thing down." "Andra," Jax replied, his voice unusually somber. "That warlord, it's like nothing we've faced before. Its armor looks impenetrable. Everything has a weakness," Andra shot back. "Find it." She peeked out from her cover, her visor zooming in on the warlord. It moved with terrifying grace, its massive frame belied by fluid, almost elegant motions. Its troops fought around it like a living tide, their glowing weapons tearing through whatever resistance Echo Squad mustered. Andra grit her teeth. Humanity didn't have the numbers, the resources, or the advanced tech of the Kraithen. What they had was adaptability. And rage. "Ortega, cover fire," Andra barked. "On it," Ortega replied, popping up from behind a rock and unleashing a hail of plasma rounds. The Kraithen shifted their focus, giving Andra a narrow window to move. She darted between cover, her enhanced reflexes saving her from a near-miss as a Kraithen warrior lunged at her with a serrated blade. She countered with brutal efficiency, A pulse round to the throat followed by a knife to its chest. Target marked, Jax called out suddenly. The warlord's got some kind of energy core on its back. Looks vulnerable, but it's shielded. You'll need to get close. Figures, Andra muttered. All right, Jax, keep the smaller ones off me. Everyone else, hold your ground. I'm going after it. Are you insane? Ortega yelled. Just cover me. Andra snapped, cutting off any further protest. She sprinted toward the warlord, weaving through the chaos of the battlefield. Her HUD blinked red as proximity warnings lit up, but she ignored them. A Krathan stepped into her path, swinging a massive war axe. She slid under its swing, firing upward as she passed, the creature collapsing in a heap behind her. The warlord noticed her approach. It turned, its glowing weapon charging with an ominous hum. Andra, watch out! Jax shouted. The beam fired. Andra dove to the side, the blast grazing her shoulder and sending her tumbling. Pain flared, but she gritted her teeth and pushed herself up. Her armor was scorched, but functional. She was close now, close enough to see the faint pulsations of the energy core Jax had mentioned. It was shielded, just as he'd said, but shields could be overloaded. She unclipped a pulse grenade from her belt. Let's see how tough you really are, she growled. The warlord roared, swinging its weapon in a wide arc. Andra rolled under the strike, the ground shaking as the massive blade struck where she'd just been. She came up behind the creature, activating the grenade and slamming it onto the shielded core. The warlord twisted with surprising speed, its massive arm catching her and sending her flying. She hit the ground hard, her visor cracking. For a moment, stars danced in her vision, but she forced herself to focus. The grenade detonated. A wave of energy erupted from the warlord's back, its shield flickering and collapsing. The creature staggered, a guttural growl escaping its maw. Andra, it's vulnerable! Jax yelled. I see it, she snapped, dragging herself to her feet. Her rifle was gone, lost in the chaos, but her knife was still in its sheath. The warlord turned to face her, its glowing eyes narrowing. It knew she was the threat now. It charged. Andra braced herself, adrenaline surging through her veins. The warlord swung its weapon, but this time she didn't dodge. She leapt, using the creature's arm as a springboard to propel herself onto its back. It roared in fury, thrashing wildly as she climbed toward the exposed energy core. Her knife flashed in the dim light, and with a fierce cry, she drove it into the core. Sparks erupted as the blade sank deep, the warlord convulsing beneath her. But it wasn't dead. The warlord reached back, grabbing her and hurling her to the ground. She landed with a sickening crunch, pain lancing through her ribs. Andra! Ortega's voice was filled with panic. The warlord loomed over her, its weapon raised for a killing blow. Andra forced herself to move, her hand finding another grenade. She activated it, clutching it tightly as the warlord brought its weapon down. At the last moment, she rolled, the weapon striking the ground where she'd been. She jammed the grenade into the core's exposed cavity and rolled again, just as it detonated. The explosion was deafening. The warlord let out an earth-shaking roar, its massive frame collapsing as its core imploded. Andra lay on the ground, gasping for air, her vision swimming. Andra, are you? Jax's voice cut out as static filled her comm. She barely managed to lift her head. The warlord was dead, its troops retreating, but the cost had been high. Her squad was scattered, the battlefield littered with the remains of both human and Krathan forces. And then she saw it, on the horizon, more dropships descending. Her heart sank. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The battlefield was eerily quiet after the warlord's death. The smoking carcass of the massive Krathan lay in a crater, its glowing runes dimming as if the creature's essence were draining into the earth. Andra forced herself to her feet, ignoring the stabbing pain in her ribs. Her visor flickered erratically, the crack in its lens distorting her HUD. Jax, Ortega, status, she said, her voice rasping through the comm. Still here, Jax replied, though his voice was strained. Took a hit, but I'm functional. Alive, barely, Ortega added. We've got incoming, Andra. More dropships. A lot more. Andra clenched her fists. The reinforcements weren't just an escalation, they were an overkill response. The Krathen weren't retreating. They were regrouping for total annihilation. "Fall back to rally point Omega," she ordered. "We can't hold this position. Jax, keep their snipers busy. Ortega, set traps as we go. Everyone else, move like your life depends on it, because it does." The squad began their retreat, a chaotic ballet of cover fire and rapid movement. The Krathen forces were relentless, pressing forward with mechanical precision. Their war cries echoed across the battlefield, a chilling harmony of alien resolve. Andra darted between cover, her movements sharp despite the pain that threatened to slow her. A Krathen warrior emerged from the smoke, its serrated blade raised high. Before it could strike, a plasma bolt from Jax's rifle took it down. "Thanks," Andra muttered into the comm. "Don't thank me yet," Jax replied. "They've got aerial drones coming in. Looks like they're armed." Andra glanced upward, her stomach twisting as sleek Krathen drones zipped through the smoke-filled sky. Their sleek frames glowed faintly, each equipped with a pair of plasma cannons that could shred infantry in seconds. "Ortega, do we have anything for those?" Andra asked. "Yeah, but you're not gonna like it," Ortega replied, her voice tense. "I've got 2 EMP charges left. Problem is, I'll need to get close to plant them." "Too risky," Andra said, her mind racing. "Jax, can you snipe their cores?" "Not from this angle," Jax replied. "They are too fast." A loud explosion rocked the ground nearby, cutting their conversation short. Andra turned to see another squad member, Grant, caught in the blast. His screams were cut short as Krathen warriors descended on him. "Grant's down," Ortega shouted, her voice cracking. Andra's jaw tightened. Every loss was another weight on her shoulders, but she couldn't let it break her focus. "Keep moving. We're almost at the rally point." The squad reached the outskirts of an abandoned Krathen outpost, its once gleaming spires now blackened and twisted from earlier battles. It wasn't much, but it offered some semblance of cover. "Set up a perimeter," Andra ordered. "Ortega, rig those EMP charges on the entrances. Jax, find a perch and watch for aerials." As the squad scrambled to fortify their position, Andra took a moment to assess their situation. They were down to 7, their ammo dangerously low, and reinforcements were still pouring in. The odds weren't just stacked against them, they were insurmountable. But surrender wasn't in humanity's nature. "Andra," Jax called out over the comm, "you're gonna want to see this." She climbed up to his position, using the twisted remains of a Krathen tower as a ladder. When she reached him, he handed her a pair of binoculars, nodding toward the horizon. Her heart sank as she focused on the scene. A massive Krathen command crawler, a mobile fortress, was advancing, flanked by columns of warriors and mechanized walkers. Its towering structure bristled with weaponry, and its shields shimmered ominously in the dim light. "They are not just here to fight," Jax said grimly. "They're here to wipe us out." Andra lowered the binoculars, her mind working overtime. The crawler was the key. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a command center. Take it down, and they might have a chance to disrupt the Krathen forces. "We're going to hit it," she said. Jax stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Are you serious? That thing's got enough firepower to level a city. And it's the only way we're getting out of this alive," Andra replied. "You saw those drones. They'll overrun us in minutes if we stay here. We take out that crawler, and maybe, just maybe, we buy ourselves some time." Jax hesitated, then nodded. "What's the plan?" Andra pulled up the schematic for an earlier version of the Krathen crawler on her HUD. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. "We'll divide into 2 teams," she said. "Ortega, you'll take the EMP charges and disable the crawler's shield generator. Jax, you'll provide sniper cover. The rest of us will create a diversion and draw their forces away." "And who's taking out the crawler itself?" Ortega asked over the comm. "I am," Andra said without hesitation. The plan was insanity, and they all knew it. But there was no time to debate. The Krathen forces were closing in. "Move out," Andra ordered. The squad split into their assigned roles. Ortega and Jax moved with surgical precision, navigating the shadows toward the crawler's shield generator. Andra and the rest of the squad launched their diversion, attacking the advancing Krathen troops with a fury born of desperation. Pulse rounds lit up the battlefield as Echo's squad fought with every ounce of strength they had left. Andra's movements were a blur, her knife flashing as she took down enemy after enemy. Ortega's voice crackled over the comm, planting the EMP now. 30 seconds. Hold the line. Andra shouted. The Krathen forces pressed harder, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the squad. Andra's pulse rifle overheated, and she tossed it aside, resorting to her sidearm. EMP is live. Ortega called out. A pulse of energy rippled across the battlefield, and the crawlers' shields flickered and died. Shields are down, Jax confirmed. Andra didn't waste a second. She sprinted toward the crawler, her boots pounding against the scorched earth. Krathen warriors moved to intercept her, but Jax's sniper fire cleared her path. She reached the crawler's base and began climbing, using every ounce of strength to haul herself upward. The massive structure trembled beneath her as its weapons fired at her squad below. Andra, you've got company, Jax shouted. She glanced down to see Krathen warriors scaling the crawler after her. Keep them off me, she yelled, pushing herself harder. She reached the top, where the crawler's command node jutted out like a metallic tumor. The access hatch was locked, but a well-placed grenade solved that problem. Inside, the control room was a mess of alien technology, glowing consoles, and pulsating wires. She didn't understand it, but she didn't need to. She set the last of her explosives in the room's core, programming a 30-second timer. As she turned to leave, the access hatch slammed open, and a Krathen warrior charged in. Andra didn't hesitate. She tackled the creature, the two of them grappling in a deadly dance. The alien's strength was overwhelming, but Andra's determination burned hotter. With a final, desperate move, she wrenched the warrior's weapon from its grasp and plunged it into its chest. The creature collapsed, and she stumbled toward the edge of the crawler. Andra, the time is ticking, Ortega shouted. I'm on my way, she replied, leaping from the crawler as the countdown hit 5. She hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Behind her, the crawler erupted in a massive explosion, the shockwave throwing her forward. For a moment, everything was still. Then Jax's voice crackled over the comm. Holy, you did it. Andra pushed herself up, her body screaming in protest. The Krathen forces were in disarray, their command structure shattered. But the fight wasn't over. Far in the distance, another wave of reinforcements appeared. Andra gritted her teeth. Echo Squad, she said, her voice unwavering. We're not done yet. The reinforced Krathen waves poured over the horizon like an unstoppable tide, the ominous hum of their war machines reverberating through the smoke-filled battlefield. Andra stood amidst the carnage, her body battered but unyielding, her squad regrouping around her in a tight formation. They were exhausted, their numbers dwindling, and their ammunition running dangerously low. But humanity had faced extinction before. Andra's voice, steady despite the odds, cut through the chaos. Echo Squad, this is it, she said, rallying her team. They've thrown everything at us, and we're still standing. If they want this world, they'll have to pay for it in blood. Ortega grimaced, her face streaked with soot. Boss, they've got walkers and heavy artillery incoming. We're not exactly equipped for that. Andra glanced at the wreckage of the crawler, its massive explosions still lighting up the sky behind them. An idea sparked, a desperate gamble. She activated her comm, pulling up a tactical map. We may not have heavy weapons, she said, but they do. If we can take control of that artillery column, we can turn their own firepower against them. Jax let out a dry chuckle. You mean march straight into their kill zone, steal their guns, and hope we don't get vaporized? Andra smirked. Exactly. A tense silence hung in the air. Then Ortega barked a laugh, shaking her head. Why not? We've done crazier things. The squad moved with grim determination, using the lingering smoke and wreckage to mask their approach. Krathen troops swarmed the battlefield, but their disarray from the crawler's destruction gave Echo Squad a narrow window to strike. Andra took point, her knife in one hand and a scavenged Krathen pulse rifle in the other. Every step was a calculated risk, every movement a dance with death. The closer they got to the artillery line, the heavier the resistance became. A towering Crathan Walker loomed ahead, its dual plasma cannons swiveling toward them. Walkers locking on. Ortega shouted. "Take it out!" Andra yelled, diving into cover as the cannons unleashed a barrage of plasma bolts. Jax was already in position, his sniper rifle lining up the shot. The Walker's core was protected by heavy armor, but a faint glow near its joint caught his eye. He fired. The Walker staggered, its leg collapsing in a shower of sparks. It toppled forward, crashing into a group of Crathan infantry and clearing a path for the squad. "Nice shot, Jax," Andra called out, moving forward. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "We've got more incoming." They reached the artillery line, a series of massive Crathan plasma cannons mounted on mobile platforms. Alien operators scrambled to reposition the weapons, but Echo's squad hit them with unrelenting force. Andra took down 2 Crathan gunners with brutal efficiency, her knife plunging into their exposed necks. Ortega rigged explosives on one of the platforms, forcing the operators to scatter. Jax picked off stragglers with cold precision. Within minutes, they had control of the cannons. "Ortega, get these things operational," Andra ordered. "On it," Ortega replied, her fingers flying over the alien controls. "Give me 60 seconds. Andra turned to Jax. "Cover her. The rest of you, hold this position at all costs." The Crathan reinforcements were closing in, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the squad. Andra fought like a cornered animal, every movement a calculated act of survival. A Crathan berserker charged her, its massive frame blotting out the sky. She sidestepped its swing, planting a grenade on its back and diving for cover as it exploded. "Cannons are live," Ortega shouted. Andra didn't hesitate. She grabbed the controls of the nearest platform and swung the cannon toward the advancing Crathan forces. With a roar of defiance, she unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. The battlefield lit up as the captured artillery decimated the Crathan ranks. Walkers exploded, infantry scattered, and the tide of the battle shifted. The Crathan forces hesitated, their advance faltering. Andra seized the moment, her voice ringing out over the comm. "Echo Squad, push forward. Show them what humanity is made of." The squad surged ahead, their captured cannons carving a path through the enemy lines. Every Crathan they felled was another step toward survival, another testament to humanity's indomitable spirit. But the Crathan weren't finished yet. A massive shadow fell over the battlefield as a Crathan dreadnought descended from the clouds. Its hull bristled with weapons, and its energy shields glowed like a miniature sun. Andra's heart sank. The dreadnought was a game-changer, a weapon of mass destruction designed to obliterate entire cities. "This just got worse," Jax muttered. "Ortega, can those cannons breach its shields?" Andra asked, her mind racing. "Not a chance," Ortega replied. "We'd need something much bigger." Andra's eyes narrowed as a new plan formed. "Then we take it out from the inside." The squad stared at her, their exhaustion replaced by disbelief. "You can't be serious," Ortega said. "I am," Andra replied. "Ortega, rig the cannons to overload. We'll use them as a distraction while we board that thing." "And once we're inside?" Jax asked. "We take out its reactor," Andra said simply. It was suicide, and they all knew it. But there was no other way. Ortega worked quickly, setting the captured cannons to self-destruct. The squad used the chaos to approach the dreadnought, boarding it through a maintenance hatch. Inside, the ship was a labyrinth of glowing corridors and alien machinery. Crathan soldiers patrolled the halls, but Echo's squad moved with lethal efficiency, taking them out before they could raise the alarm. They reached the reactor room, a massive chamber pulsating with energy. The reactor's core was encased in a protective field, its controls guarded by an elite Crathan unit. Andra led the charge, her knife flashing as she took down one of the guards. Jax provided covering fire, while Ortega worked to disable the field. "We've got incoming," Jax warned as reinforcements poured into the chamber. Andra fought with everything she had, her movements a blur of calculated violence. Blood and sweat mixed as she cut down enemy after enemy, her focus unwavering. "Fields down," Ortega shouted. Andra grabbed the last of her explosives, planting them on the reactor core. The countdown began. "Time to go," she yelled. The squad sprinted through the dreadnought's corridors, the sound of the reactor destabilizing echoing behind them. They reached an escape pod just as the ship began to shake violently. The pod launched, hurtling away from the dreadnought as it erupted in a blinding explosion. The shockwave rocked the battlefield below, sending Krathan forces into disarray. Andra stared out the pod's window, her body battered but her spirit unbroken. The dreadnought's destruction had turned the tide, but the war was far from over. As the pod descended toward the smoking ruins of the battlefield, Andra gripped her knife tightly. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. They were proving, with every battle, why they were the galaxy's most terrifying warrior species.